get underneath here with a screwdriver to prevent from scratching the wheel. Pull that cap off. Use a 22mm socket, take the lug nuts off. Remove the wheel. Underneath the front lower control arm, I'm just going to use a pull jack and support before I take the shock bolts out. It shouldn't fall very much or at all, but just in case. Use a 15mm socket, take these two bolts out. And you can lower the pull jack. Using a 15mm wrench, put this over the sway bar link nut up top and use a 15mm socket. Loosen this up. You don't have to take it off completely, just take the top nut and bushing off. To remove the upper nuts of the shock assembly, we're going to go in through the engine bay under the hood, but you can also go in through the fender well if you wanted to take the inner fender well out. Then you'd have to use either a ratchet or a ratchet wrench. There's a connector right here that you need to disconnect. There's a retainer right there where the connector was, so you want to take that out. You can use a trim tool, and then there's a small lock on the connector. I'm going to pop that lock down. Just use a pocket screwdriver. Pop that either out or just back a little bit. There we go. That's out. Then you can push down on the button. Disconnect the connector right there. Then all the nuts on the top of the strut you need to take off. But there's wires that are attached with retainers. So grab those wires. Actually, you can use a trim tool. Just pry underneath the trim tool. Just pry those up. Just pry underneath those. Get those off. And those are all out of the way. I use an 18mm socket. Take these nuts off. And we got all those off. Using a pry bar, I'm just going to pry right here, just to lower the lower control arm. And we can slide the shock, the bottom part of the shock, out of the control arm. And slide it down. Pull that wire. And then slide it up and out. You're going to want to set this up in a spring compressor assembly, and we're going to take this top off right here. Just use some side cutters, cut the little wire tie. And there's this cap that needs to come off. You can just try to twist that. Slide that cap off. And we're not going to need these wires anymore, so we can just cut the wires here. Slide that cap off. Just to make it easier, I'm just going to cut the wire down here. Now we have to compress the spring, take that nut off. I'm going to use an 18mm socket, take this nut off. They do make special wrenches for this where you can hold the wrench and then just spin the center, the stud, but sometimes you can just get it off this way. Just holding the shock while I take that off. Keep in mind the direction of the shock, the way the shock attaches down below. And just slide it down. And just pop this washer off. You can just use a hammer. Sometimes it stays in the mount up top. You can take this bumper off, reuse that, and take this piece off. You can wipe it down. Slide that over the new one. Take this top off. Slide the bumper over the wires. And then this washer. I'll slide the wire up first. Then you want to slide the wire through the mount. Just like that. This washer goes on top. Put the nut over. Get the nut started. You want to keep in mind where the shock was when you took it apart. Line that up. You could have marked it before you took it apart if you wanted to. Now I'm going to tighten this down using a ratchet wrench to start, and a 9mm wrench to hold the stud from spinning. If you don't remember exactly how it's lined up, you want this lined up with one of the studs so that it's like a triangle. All right, that's snug. And then we'll take the other one off as well. Loosen that clamp. Now with that still positioned in the right spot, now we can loosen up on the clamps. Now we're going to take the old connector apart because we're going to reuse it. Just use a straight blade screwdriver. Get underneath the clips, the base here. Should be able to pop these out. Just pop this off, just like that. Under here, you want to take this tab off with the retainer, slide that off. We got to remove the terminals from the connector. There is, at the base of the connector, if you take a small pick, there's a little purple door. You have to go on one side of the door and just slide it over. It's very hard to see. If you slide it over and pull real hard, you can yank the wires out. It takes a good amount of effort. You might even want to put the wires in a vise and just try to pry it up a little bit. So that pushes down on that little tab, and then you can slide the wire out and do the same for the other one. Now we're going to have to make the same over here for the wires on the top of the shock. So we're going to strip these wires and then put these terminals on. And this is the lighter color wire, so that's going to go on the left side. Just strip away some of the wire, some of the insulation. Just like that. You can trim the end. Put this little insulator on. To right about there. terminal. Slide that in position. And then you're going to need some terminal crimping pliers. Get that in place and very carefully crimp the wires. Crimp the terminal. And then just crimp it. And then do the same on the other one. Those are both on there and they're both crimped. You can just wiggle it just to make sure it's good. And then we're gonna reinstall these the same way the old ones came out. Line those up. If you have to, you might have to crimp these down a little bit more. And push those. They should lock in. And that's good. Now you can slide the other parts back on. And this will just crimp down. Lock that in place. That's just going to keep the wire. And then the retainer, slide that in place, lock it down. Now we can install the shock into the car. Now, slide this bottom in first. Slide it all the way down. And you can get the wire up top. And line it up, and the studs up with the holes. And holding it up, I'm gonna put it up the same way we took it off. Just use a pry bar, pry the control arm down, and then let up, and that should hold in place right like that. I'm gonna take the bolts underneath. You can pry down on the control arm if you have to get these to line up a little bit. And torque these to 37 foot-pounds. And put the sway bar link bushing back up and the nut. And tighten that down. Make sure the wire isn't pinched underneath here. Just set that out of the way for now. We'll connect it later. Then take the bolts. Or the nuts, take the nuts, put the nuts on top. Now making sure the wires are out of the way. I'm going to tighten these down. Sure those are tight, and if you can get a torque wrench on those, you want to torque those to 37 foot-pounds. And then all the wire retainers, you want to push those back in place over the threads. And then find the connector for the top of the shock and connect that. Lock it down. And then there's a retainer on that. If you can get that back into where the retainer goes. Right back here. It goes right there. And that's all set. Put the wheel on. Line that up. Put the lug nuts on. Now I'm going to torque these lug nuts to 140 foot-pounds in a cross pattern to tighten the wheel down evenly. And just go around again, double check. Take the center cap, make sure you line up where the valve stem goes, and put that back on.